Hey everyone, Kibler here. I just got back from MagicCon Atlanta, which was a ton of fun. I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about, magic, obviously, and just had a lot of thoughts that I wanted to share, which is why I am making this video. I do want to say, sort of in advance, that, MagicCon Atlanta was great. I love magic, right? Like, magic is the single biggest influencing factor in my entire life in so many ways. All the opportunities that I've had, so many of the friends that I've made and everything. I am going to be very critical about a lot of things about Magic right now in this video, so I do feel like it's important to preface all of that with this. I'm not someone who hates Magic. I'm not someone who is like a hater even of some, specific controversial things in Magic right now in general. But, I do feel like, it's necessary to lead with that. MagicCon is an amazing event. If you do have an opportunity to go, I highly suggest checking it out. It's just incredible to be surrounded by so many people who are also such huge fans of the game that I love. And interact with them. It is exhausting. I joked a number of times that it's kind of like being a shark. If I stop moving, I'll die. Just because we have so many people who want to chat with us, take pictures with us, get signatures, which is not really a complaint. It's more, sort of an explanation of our experience, why we can't stop and, play a game with folks, because, then we're spending an hour with like, 2 or 3 people, rather than being able to interact with all of the people who would love to be able to say hi to us. Like literally my ankle hurts because I was walking around and on my feet so much every single day. I injured myself just by overuse because I was walking, 15, 20,000 steps a day, just constantly moving around the convention center to all the events. But that's not what you're here to listen to me talk about. What you're here to listen to me talk about is sort of Magic, broadly speaking. And my thoughts on where Magic is right now and where it seems to be going. And obviously, the most significant factor of that, in most people's eyes, is Universes Beyond. The schedule for next year was largely announced at MagicCon. And not only are there 4 Universes Beyond sets next year, and only 3 in-universe sets, we're at least told that this is a temporary thing based on like licensing timelines and agreements, but that is obviously something that has a big impact on Magic, and how Magic feels to a lot of people. And I do want to say, I am in no way a Universes Beyond hater. I think that there are a lot of people who are like, oh, keep that stuff out of Magic. I want Magic to just be Magic, and, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's a reasonable criticism, but I think that it does sort of miss the point of, these things being really appealing to a lot of people. I think that I have personally seen friends of mine get pulled in by some of the Universes Beyond things and become Magic players, right? It's not just like, oh, well, they come in, they want to play with the specific property that drew them in. They become someone who loves Magic, and it was just a happenstance that they were, attracted by Lord of the Rings or 40K or Fallout or whatever it is. And I have friends who have gotten into Magic or gotten back into Magic because of all of those things. So I am not someone who says I hate Universes Beyond, get rid of Universes Beyond entirely. But I do think that the sort of Universes Beyondification of Magic is going a little too far and is having a bunch of impacts on Magic that I think, even outside of the sort of hardline take of I want my Magic to be Magic, are having very real and very, very meaningful negative effects on the experience of everyone sort of involved in Magic, kind of no matter how you interact with the game. And I do sort of want to talk about that in a number of sort of steps, basically. And I think that I would be fine with basically Secret Lair of anything. Like, I don't care that you're making a Secret Lair of Dwight Schrute. People can alter their cards however they want. Like, I might not be interested in playing with Dwight Schrute cards, but if they are Secret Lair reskins, even if they're like Commander decks or they're, Secret Lair mechanically unique cards, though I think we're kind of going down a rabbit hole that does kind of make things a bit more problematic the more sort of deeply you go into this. And that's why I think the way in which it's being handled has become an issue to a lot of players. And that, I think, is highlighted with Spider-Man. I don't know how Spider-Man, broadly speaking, has sold. I think that there are very likely people who are, Spider-Man fans or Marvel fans or comic fans, who have probably gotten into Magic because of the release of Spider-Man. But I also think that there's very clearly fatigue with Marvel broadly. I think that maybe, these sort of sets would have been much better received at sort of the peak of the popularity of Marvel in broad popular culture with like Avengers Endgame, 5 years ago or whatever, 6 years ago. And obviously, these deals take a long time to make, so it's not like you can just suddenly release these things, back then. But I do think that Spider-Man has been pretty poorly received by at least the core Magic audience for a variety of reasons. And I want to talk about some of that now and sort of how that echoes into the other Universes Beyond sets and my concerns with them. Like, for instance, I actually think Lord of the Rings, amazing. I loved Lord of the Rings. I thought that Lord of the Rings was a fantastic set that dovetailed very well with Magic and everything. Similarly, like, again, I love the commander decks for properties like 40K or Fallout. I think those are really cool. I have no real criticism of those things existing. Because they are at least like, even though something like Fallout, like, yeah, these are sort of, like humans in like a modern world, they don't really have the same kind of like jarring disconnect for me that some of the other things do. I did have this same kind of disconnect that I have now with Spider-Man with the Doctor Who commander decks. And that's because Doctor Who is a property that, much like Spider-Man, showcases like real world locations in the modern day. And Spider-Man at least went in the direction of being comic Spider-Man rather than movie Spider-Man. So we're not seeing like real world actors like we did in Doctor Who. And I have a similar criticism of some of the upcoming stuff because it's so jarring to me that we're getting this weird uncanny valley of like David Tennant on a Magic card or Maisie Williams on a Magic card or whatever, that we're definitely going to see with Star Trek, for instance, coming next year. And like the themes and places that we see from like Spider-Man, it's like, here's just New York City, right? Here's a bagel with schmear. Here's rent is due, right? Like, I get that these are like themes from the Spider-Man story, but they also are things that it's like, I don't want to play my card game with Wizards and Dragons and have to interact with the rent is due card, right? I do think that the nature of Spider-Man being a actual set, a standard legal set, puts it in a very different place than we have seen other stuff. And I didn't have the same criticisms with Final Fantasy because Final Fantasy was much like the 40Ks and the Fallouts, even as a standard legal set. It didn't have the same jarring, like, this is just modern, American or European life or whatever, right? And it doesn't represent real world locations and real world people, right? Like, it's showcasing a video game, and the worlds that those take place in. That, I think, is a very big difference in terms of how it feels, right? How it meshes with the sort of fantastical themes of the Magic universe, right? And again, I had the same criticisms of Doctor Who. Like, it is very weird to have like history teacher on a card, right? Like, to have just like, here's just something happening in London or whatever. Maybe that's a personal thing, but I have seen that kind of echoed from a lot of people. And frankly, I think that has potentially had an impact on just the popularity of the Spider-Man set broadly. Like, I've heard that, it's a pretty common refrain. It's like, I don't want to have these things, which are just real life, show up in my game. It just feels weird, right? And I think that we see that throughout Spider-Man and the response to Spider-Man. Like, I was told that of the panels on the main stage, the Mana stage, at MagicCon, that the one that was the most poorly attended was the design of the Spider-Man panel. Actually, we had our show, our Commander at Home Live, on the main stage on Sunday, and the panel that was supposed to be before ours was the Art of Spider-Man panel. That got moved to a smaller room, and I actually went and took a look, and that smaller room was nearly empty. I think that the interest in Spider-Man, compared to literally every other like standard legal Magic set that I've ever seen in my 30+ year history playing Magic, is the lowest that I've ever seen from in franchise Magic players, right? And maybe, again, that there are a bunch of comic fans who are like, oh my god, I love Spider-Man, I'm going to try out Magic because of this. But it's not like comic fans and Marvel fans are like at a loss for card games if they want to play card games with Spider-Man. There's any number of them that exist and have existed throughout the years, and this is in no way like a unique experience that they will, like, somehow now be able to play with their favorite characters. It's not like a Fallout or, you know, a 40K, where like this is the singular place where there is, you know, an opportunity to play, or at least the only good opportunity there's to play. But there's tons of ways you can play Marvel superheroes, right? So like it's not the same in terms of the power it has as far as like an acquisition tool, like for these other games. In my mind, that seems to be what would probably be the case. You're also looking at things that I think are much more natural crossover with things like Final Fantasy. Like, again, both the sort of world themes and everything. And obviously, superheroes are kind of a fantastical thing, but again, they do exist in the modern world in a way that, you know, all these other things that have, in my mind, been successful crossovers with Universes Beyond and Magic that have been very different. And that's just touching on the thematic elements, right? We're just touching on like, okay, what makes sense to bring in to Magic as like a property. Like I don't feel nearly as bad about like Avatar, for instance, which is coming out later this year, which has other issues though. If you paid attention to the release schedules that were revealed previously, originally Lorwyn, the Lorwyn Eclipsed, was supposed to be the final set of this year. And for whatever reason, most likely, almost certainly due to licensing issues and the dates that things are supposed to be released based on licensing agreements, we saw that Lorwyn Eclipsed is getting moved to be the first set of next year, and the final set of this year is going to be the Avatar set. While that may seem like, oh, you're just shuffling around the release schedule, that has very real implications for the actual game. For instance, we had the Shockland cycle that was brought back into Standard with the release of Edge of Eternities and is completed in Lorwyn Eclipsed. Well, now with Lorwyn Eclipsed being shunted into next year, not only do we have to wait several additional months to have the opportunity to play with the full cycle of Shockland, so if you are someone who plays Standard, which is a format that Wizards has been trying to push, and I think rightfully so, as I talked about in a previous video about how important Standard is to the health of Magic as a whole, if you're someone who's interested in playing Standard, you now have to wait like several additional months to be able to play with reasonable mana in a lot of different decks. So, you know, just based on like the licensor approval that is now an integral part of half or more of Magic sets, we're seeing these things have to be shuffled that sacrifices the intended gameplay for these, you know, licensor demands. It clearly was intended based on the originally announced schedule that the Shocklands would be, you know, all together in Standard the same year, right? And now they're not. Now it's several months later. And it's not even just like, oh, you have to wait a little longer. It's like, okay, you wait a little longer. Well, now they're desynced in rotation. Now, you know, based on the, you know, the new way with the removal of blocks and everything, that rotation has been announced to work, that it is a yearly basis rather than a like fall release basis. It used to be back in the day when we had blocks in Magic, the fall was like the big set for the new block, and then you had the smaller sets that released, and then the fall release of the new big set was what, you know, what kicked off rotation for the next year. Because we're so far away from that, now we are just doing calendar year rotation, and because of that combination of factors, now there will be a year-long format that has one of the sets of Shocklands and not the other, unless Wizards does something to mitigate that. That's a really big issue, right? That's a really big deal, and that's just because of a non-gameplay, non-development related thing, because now Magic is so beholden to these external licensors. Because of these external licensors requiring additional approval process on things too, like I have to imagine that eats into the time that teams have and the resources that teams have to actually do this development. And now that there is 6 or 7 sets with next year, 7 sets coming out in a year, we are certainly seeing these teams, even if teams are appropriately staffed, right? Even if you have enough game designers and playtesters and developers on any individual set, there's now just so many more sets and so many more cards that you have to consider in actual development. It's so much more likely that you screw something up, right? It's so much more likely that something falls through the cracks. Like, what do you think the odds are that in playtesting, someone used Agatha's Soul Cauldron on a VV at any point? Because these sets are years and years apart, and who knows how much of the development time of Final Fantasy was complete before they made the decision to change to a 3-year rotation, which is the reason that Agatha's Soul Cauldron is still legal with VV. So all of these like factors of these moving pieces that are related, some of them to UB, but some of them to just other decisions, and it's like was a decision to make 3-year standard rotation, keeping in mind the fact that, there were so many more cards are being released in the future, right? Like, if the idea was to make standard, feel more accessible because your cards didn't rotate as quickly, well, now suddenly you have fully 50%, fully double in terms of the average year of standard releases, right? It used to be 3 standard releases a year, right? There was the block, right? Maybe there was the block and a core set or whatever, but there was 3 or 4. So it's either double or 50% more the number of sets that you're dealing with every single year in standard, and also an additional year's worth. It's just so much, and it's so much that it is so hard to get things right in the development process. And in the same kind of the same breath, right? The same time frame, Wizards made the decision that we're going to announce a once yearly banning thing and only do emergency bans. And now you have so many more opportunities to have made mistakes, and you are tying yourself to, we're only going to do emergency bans outside of these windows, right? Or this window even. And frankly, you are just giving yourself so many more opportunities to have terrible standard metagames because of those mistakes that are essentially inevitable, because of just how much pressure you're putting your development teams under to do so many things and make so many Magic cards. I don't know if there's any additional pressure from these licensors to ensure that the marquee characters of their properties are good. How much pressure was there that Sephiroth was a really good card? How much pressure was there that Vivi, was a really good card? I don't know how big a deal Vivi is, but I know a bit how big a deal Sephiroth is. It does sound likely that Wizards is gonna ban something in the Vivi Cauldron decks, probably Vivi from the sounds of the article that was posted. But is there any amount of pressure that you don't ban marquee characters and cards from games? Does this now create this additional layer of outside pressure where you upset your license, your licensor, because you had to ban Iron Man, right? Thor, whatever, Captain America, because you made it too good because they insisted that it had to be good. I don't know whether those things are the case, but they have to be at least in the back of someone's mind, right? Those might not be in your face issues, but they are something that comes along with not having full control over your game and what's part of it anymore. It's all a very big deal. And even with reveals, for whatever reason, we don't know what the second set of next year is. We know what all of the others are, but we don't know what the second one is. And I have to imagine that's something that they have some plans of announcing at some other big upcoming thing. New York Comic Con is in a few weeks. Maybe it's some comic property that's associated with that. They want to have this big announcement there. I don't know. But you lose control of these things when you are working with these external groups that now have, again, some element of control over your entire process, whether it's development, marketing, yada, 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 when your releases are. And all of that leads to more decisions being made that are not necessarily for what is best for the game. And that's the problem, right? That's the crux of all of this. Are these decisions being made to make Magic the best game it can be, or are they being made because we need to attract all these additional licensors and as a result, players? And I think it's a good thing, right? If we're attracting new Magic players. It's less of a good thing if we're just attracting people who buy Magic cards and make packs of Magic more expensive because they want to collect the things. That's still a good thing to Hasbro. Long term, is it, right? Is it a good thing if you end up alienating your core player base because you appeal to periodic groups of collectors who want the shiny things that come out of the, collector packs or whatever? Although, to be fair, I constantly see people refer to collector packs and collector booster boxes as the cost of things. No one needs those. You don't need to have the shiny thing. And I actually do think that the existence of collector boxes and boosters is one of the better things to happen to Magic, because it does create this layer of collectability that has nothing to do with gameplay, and having the, fancy foil, alternate treatment, whatever things of a card, at least usually does help make the base versions of those cards more accessible to someone who just wants the game pieces to play with. All of that I'm totally fine with. Make as many one rings as you want, as long as I can get the cards that I want to play with in my deck. I don't think that the collectors who are trying to get the fancy stuff, unless those collectors are making it so there's no product available, period. If there's no collector product available, fine. I don't care. You shouldn't care if what you are as a player. If you're a collector, sure, I understand. There could be some frustration there. Which also kind of gets me into one of the other things, which is unrelated to UB broadly, but is something that I have found has increased in recent years in Magic, probably related to the increased, visibility and cachet of Magic in kind of more common pop culture, which is the obsession that people have with value, and not the way that JLK does, but the way that like, scalpers do. There is this obsession with, oh, well, like, and this I think may go away to some extent, with the lack of master sets. One of the things that Mark Rosewater did say, they are at least currently pressing pause on master sets, which are like, re-release sets, because they are releasing so much other product that's new. And again, like, to kind of back up slightly, I was always fine with the master sets as far as like, them being products that released. Like, all they did was like, create more supply of these things. And if you were a collector who had these things because you were holding onto them for value, that could be upsetting. But if you're just someone who wants to play with the cards, they're fantastic. Other than when they were like massively overpriced. I think the Commander Masters double, I don't know, one of them was insanely overpriced and like, was a massive failure. Those were always fine releases because you didn't have to interact with them if you had those cards or you didn't really care about those cards. But now there's, 6 or 7 releases a year that you are forced to interact with if you want to participate in Magic in any way, because they are standard legal and obviously Commander legal, and like, they are just something that no one can just say that's not for me because it's just a side product. And that's my biggest criticism, again, is that these are all things that everyone is sort of forced to interact with if they want to play Magic and not just collect Magic or interact with Magic in a casual way. If you want to, like, play in a standard Magic tournament, you need to know what all the Spider-Man cards are. You need to know what all the Final Fantasy cards are. You also probably need to know what all the Spider-Man cards are when they're on Magic Online and you can't play them, or Magic Arena and you can't play them, which is another, bucket of issues entirely, which I'll actually talk about in a moment. I'd almost forgotten about talking about that. I didn't have it in my like little very brief outline that I wrote. But again, the value obsession, which I think is, there's always been people who are like trying to make money off of Magic. I think it has increased dramatically in recent years, and I think part of that is all of these sort of like hyper collectible things, and all of that is like okay, but I think that it has created a mindset of people who just look at the extrinsic value of any Magic product, which is to say the dollar value, that you open this and try to sell it, is it worth more than you paid for it, which is frankly a kind of a crazy way to think about like every single Magic product. Like every Commander deck, it's like, oh, how much is this worth? How much is the reprint value? When you should hope that what you get out of buying a Commander deck is that it's a fun thing to play, right? Maybe you want both from it. And given the way that prices have kind of skyrocketed with respect to, like MSRP or the lack thereof for a long time, I totally understand, especially given how, messed up the world economy and the US economy are these days, wanting to make sure that you're getting a good deal when you do decide to buy a Magic product. But there's just this obsession with value in a way that I think is really unhealthy in terms of people just not even thinking about like what the actual intrinsic value of something is, which is that it should be fun to play. That's kind of an aside into an aside. Let's talk about Arena. Obviously, the Through the Omen Paths thing on Magic Arena, I think is a like kind of unmitigated disaster in terms of like, why did you make a Spider-Man set if you couldn't put it on Arena for whatever reason, licensing stuff, I'm sure. Why was this what you did? Why did you make it a standard set? There's all these questions. I think it is legitimately the biggest like business decision failure of Magic in ages, like product wise. I am at least glad that there is no like Pro Tour that uses this immediately. Certainly for a draft format where you have to know literally the art and name of every single card twice because you want to draft physically and practice draft online to draft physically at the Pro Tour. Whew, that's crazy. And Magic Arena, I think, has had a number of kind of what I view to be major failures over the years. This is the biggest of them, but I think the other that really bothers me is just Alchemy. I've talked about this a number of times, and I had some conversation about this over the course of my weekend in Atlanta, but I have always said that I think Alchemy is a bad idea implemented poorly. And I think it's very clear that Alchemy was originally made because they wanted to have more releases than the regular number of Magic releases so they could make more money. It was, touted as, oh, this is a way we can do cool, unique things that are digital only, that you can only do on, Magic Arena. It's like, okay, sure, I guess you can rebalance things, but I think the real selling point of Magic Arena to a lot of people is the fact that it is tied to Magic, right? This is Magic that you can play online in a functional digital client. Sorry, Magic Online. RIP, you do still exist, but I actually have heard it's very good these days comparatively, but it's still basically playing Spreadsheet Simulator. But anyway, Magic Arena, I think, does itself a disservice by doing things like Alchemy, because I think that you disconnect that tie that really makes Arena kind of compelling to a lot of people, which is like, hey, I love Magic. I want to play Magic digitally. Here it is. Here's Arena. Ellie's upset about it too. She's panting on my lap in case you can hear her. It's not the real Ellie over there. This is the real Ellie. Not the real Oko either. Those are from our live show. Alchemy, I think it's awful, right? There's so many examples of like things that I think are just like abjectly terrible with Alchemy. I think a lot of the mechanics have just, people have hated them, like Heist, like a bunch of the cards are just outrageously overpowered. And it's just like, well, this is how we can sell more cards on Arena between releases. Well, now like there's so many releases that why would you even do this? Obviously, it wasn't when Alchemy existed, but like I am someone, for instance, who does not interact with elements of Magic Arena like Cube. I love Cube. Cube is like my favorite way to draft. I do not Cube draft on Arena because I'm forced to interact with Alchemy cards, and I hate them. And it is almost always correct if you are playing a draft in which there are Alchemy cards on Arena to take the Alchemy cards because they're so outrageously overpowered. I was shown some Alchemy cards at dinner when I was talking to some people, including Amy the Amazonian, and I was just like shown these like cards that are just like the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. Like I cannot fathom a human being thinking it was a good idea to like make this card for people to play with, because yeah, they're nonsense. They're absolute nonsense. Like the specialized cards from Alchemy used art from other cards and then had like 6 different abilities so they could just have as much possible game text obscured behind a keyword on a card as possible. When realistically, if you want to actually make a digital game, well, you want to use the fact that you have a computer doing this processing and you don't have to have players who know every single thing all the time to reduce the apparent complexity of cards, rather than be like, would you like to draft this card? By the way, it's 7 different cards or 8 different cards, and you don't have any way to possibly know everything and no way to have the time to actually process that in a draft. Or if you're playing against it, you have to be like, what is this? So Alchemy's horrible. That's not even getting into like the rebalancing that happens in the Alchemy legal formats. That's like, oh, now you have to know what 2 different versions of a card are depending on where you play it. I think Magic Arena would be best served to just get rid of Alchemy. Just admit it was a mistake, delete it, give people wild cards, and just make Magic Arena Magic that you can play online. And especially with how many releases there are going to be moving forward, 6 this year, 7 next year, you don't need like these intermittent things that are just releasing even more cards that will absolutely overwhelm players, both mentally and financially. Though, of course, as a business, you want to do the latter until they quit. But who knows what that threshold is, right? Like I said, I think that it is driving people like me, at least, away from participating in those things. And I would be surprised if there is a population of players on Arena who like Alchemy enough that you will like lose like interest and revenue if you just get rid of it. I think that you're much more likely to actually attract people like me back who will play more and like participate at a higher rate and higher level if you just get rid of it and admit that it was something that should never have happened, and move on with your lives. As you can see, I'm passionate about that particular topic, and a lot of these, really. Like I said, I love Magic. I think Magic is the best game ever made, and I am thrilled that something like Universes Beyond and something like Magic Arena, right, are bringing in new audiences to participate in the game. I just wish that they were done more delicately and better. I think that, like with Spider-Man, to go back to kind of the thing that started all of this, I think it's so clear that Spider-Man is originally a small set that got scope creeped when there was whatever sort of decision to like, okay, we're gonna make this a standard legal set. We're gonna like make this, a new draft format set. And like, it's just kind of a mess, I think. There are some individual cool designs in it. I think that there's some cool thematic things in it. But like, you can't tell me that it's a good idea to have a set that's supposed to be intended for the acquisition of new players who are not familiar with Magic, that has like 60 cards named Spider-Man, and have cards with the text, when Spider-Man enters, do this. What? Do you think people are going to understand how that works? All these cards are named Spider-Man, and it says when Spider-Man enters, so that means all the Spider-Mans, right? It doesn't, but come on. I am curious to see what the actual numbers look like for the success of Spider-Man, both in terms of, you know, sales, in terms of like engagement at pre-releases, in terms of engagement on Arena, in terms of all these things. Because I do think that, like I said, I think there's cool stuff that happens in the set, but it is very clear to me that the average Magic player, the average like heavily invested Magic player, is just not into it. You know, we saw like the like pre-order prices absolutely tank by like over 50% on like, you know, boxes and things. Whether that's a matter of like, you know, people just having FOMO because they saw what happened with Final Fantasy being so incredibly popular, or if it's like a reaction to just people not being into this at all, I don't know. But with just how many sets are coming out next year and the fact that over half of them are UB, I'm curious to see like what the sort of reception to Spider-Man does to influence things moving forward. Because as I said, I'm no UB hater. I just wish that it wasn't most of Magic now. And I wish that there was more care and thought put into the way in which external properties are put into Magic, because even if these are individually like well, you know, thematically designed sets and everything, so many of them just do not mesh together in a way that feels right to me as someone who has played Magic for over 30 years. There's my kind of mostly UB, some this, some that rant. I don't know, it's not really a rant. Nuanced discussion. So anyway, let me know what you all think. Where do you think Magic is going? Are you happy with it? I didn't even talk about Modern Horizons, which is one of my other least favorite things, but we'll save that for another video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.